Любой человек, примирившийся с идеей собственной смерти, способен превратиться в чрезвычайно опасного воина. Он всегда готов отдать свою жизнь на поле боя. Энергия, с которой прекрасно обученные самураи рвались в бой, стала нарицательной. А поскольку противник обладал такой же абсолютной преданностью, то поединок превращался во взаимное убийство. Поэтому в сражениях военачальник полагался только на численность воинов или на собственный талант стратега. Почитание сенсея было абсолютным, ведь именно он передавал тайные секреты мастерства ученикам. Самураи мастерски владели не только мечом, но и любым другим оружием. И прежде всего, они в совершенстве владели своим телом. Именно самураи разработали боевые искусства, ныне ставшие. Во всем облике самурая и его привычках соблюдался особый культ чистоты. Каждое утро, совершив омовение, самурай надевал чистую одежду и был физически готов к смерти вплоть до кончиков наманикюренных ногтей. Умереть неопрятным считалось позором, а смерть могла прийти к самураю в любой момент. Самурайский меч обладал огромной прочностью. Им можно было перерубить другой меч менее высокого качества или самурайские доспехи, или человека от плеча до пояса.
Proper grip is imperative to proper cutting technique. If the grip is not correct, then you're going to have a very difficult time getting a straight line on your cut. So what we're going to express and address right now is how to actually approach the handle or the tsuka with your hands as you come at it. The tsuka is slightly curved, just as the sword is slightly curved. There are diamonds that are created by the wrap on the handle itself. We take the left hand and we place it from the back side of the sword toward the handle. The knuckles will be in line with the diamonds. The right hand approaches from the top and is at least 1 finger width from the sword guard itself, the tsuba. So we never want to have the hand tight against the tsuba. We want at least 1 inch to 1.5 inches away. Notice my hands are not wrapped in from the sides, the thumbs are not on top. We're always gripping the sword like we can grip it with 2 hands and support it with the palm of the hand. And gripping. As we come from an overhead, the arms are in line, the wrist bone, the top of the wrist is in line with the wrist bone on the left side. So we don't want to grip from the side, we want to grip from the top. Any good swordsman is familiar with his tools, and his tools in this case happen to be the samurai sword itself, the katana. So what I'd like to go over right now are different parts of the katana so that you will recognize those terms and parts of the sword as we go through the rest of the DVD. So if we can take a look at the sword itself, the entire sword is referred to as a katana. Starting with the handle end, the handles are referred to as the tsuka. The tsuka has an end to it, a small butt cap that's called the tsukagashira, or the end cap. The wrapping is called the tsukamaki, or sometimes referred to as ito, which is the actual cord that wraps around it. Inside, you'll notice there is black ray skin in this particular sword. Sometimes it's white ray skin. That's called same. The pegs that hold the handle onto the blade itself are called mekugi. Mekugi. And you're always going to check a mekugi before you use it. Make sure that they're tight. Make sure they're not brittle or used or loose. The handguard is referred to as the tsuba. The scabbard is known as the saya. The end of the saya is referred to as a kojiri. There's a small knob on the saya that we refer to as the kurikata. And the kurigata, within the kurigata is attached a string. It's a braided piece of material we refer to as sageo. So the entire sword with the saya, the tsuka, the tsuba is referred to as a katana. If we remove the saya and take a look at the sword itself, you'll notice we have a small collar in this position just forward of the tsuba. The collar is referred to as the habaki. And just behind the tsuba, we have a fuchi. The entire sword of and by itself, without the tsuba on it, or the habaki, or the tsuka, it's called the toshin. The cutting edge is referred to as the ha. The back edge is referred to as the mine, sometimes referred to as mune. You'll notice there's a raised section through the middle of the sword, running from the base all the way to the tip. That's called the shinogi. It's a raised edge, and many times you're going to be using the shinogi to do your blocking or deflecting with. Behind the shinogi, and on this particular sword, is a small ditch that runs the entire length of the sword, and that is called bohi. The very tip, the curved edge, the entire area is called kisaki, and the curved edge itself is known as the hoshi. Sometimes we use the hoshi to cut, but most of the time we use the cutting edge that goes from a slight line called the yokote that separates the sword from the kisaki back to about 9 inches behind. This area from here to here, from the 9-inch mark up to the yokote, is called the monouchi. There's a cloudy line that runs just along the edge, and that's referred to as the hamon. If you understand these parts of the sword, it's very easy to understand sword technique and how and why the sword works. The basic curvature of the sword, for our express purposes in iaido or bato jutsu, is it has a general curve to it which we call sori. So there's a general curve that makes an arch. And for iai jutsu or bato jutsu, the perfect curvature, the most curvature is in the very, very center of the sword. So as you continue to learn your sword technique, it's important that you learn a little bit more about the sword. Make sure you have a good cleaning kit so that you can take care of the sword, maintain it, and enjoy your swordsmanship. And a good sword like that will last a lifetime. Targeting is very important when you're performing samurai swordsmanship. It's not enough to be able to perform a cut. It's not enough to be able to perform a waza or a kata, but it's very important that you use the proper placement of the blade on the body in order to perform that cut. Otherwise, it's going to be ineffective or less effective than it could be. So what we'd like to do right now is demonstrate for you different targeting areas of the body that we use for specific cuts. Starting off, the first cut obviously is a downward cut, and we use what we call the men, or the head, is a direct straight cut down the center line of the body. The sword travels outward, and we use the monouchi, the last 9 inches of the blade, to deliver the cut. You don't want to be too shallow, but we want to get enough of the blade in use so that it can cut through. The second cut we're going to use is a yokomen cut. Yoko means side, the men means head, so we're cutting to the side of the head, targeting normally near the temple area. You can go left side or right side as you cut. The next cut on the way down is a kesa cut. The kesa cuts and follows the line of a monk's robe. Or as you see, I'm wearing a monsuki, or a formal robe. We're cutting down along the line of that robe as a kimono as it follows down. So it starts at the neck, kesa cut starts at the neck and follows the line to the opposite hip. Delivering the cut can be delivered with the monouchi or the kisaki. The kisaki can also cut through the body as well as using the monouchi to cut a little deeper. We can cut a kesa from my left shoulder to my right hip, or we can cut a kesa from my right shoulder to my left hip. We can also cut in the opposite direction. We can do a return cut. On a return cut, a rising cut or a kiriage, we cut starting at the hip And rather than using a kesa, we actually go a little bit further toward the shoulder blade. So we don't really exit the neck area, but the kesa starts here and exits near the point and peak of the shoulder, cutting diagonally up, right side, then diagonally up the opposite direction, starting at the hip and exiting the shoulder blade. The next cut is a do cut. Do means the main portion of the body. And this can be done from the front or from the back, sometimes cutting behind the shoulder blade or to either side. Yoko, which is a sideways cut, sometimes referred to as suihei. Suihei and yoko are the exact same cut. It's a very flat cut. Or an angular cut as to the body. Right to left, straight through the body, or left to right through the body. Sometimes diagonally through the body from this position. That's still considered a do cut. The other cutting targets are on the extremities. What we refer to as the wrist is known as the kote. So sometimes as I hold a sword, my kote is exposed, particularly my right kote, because it's always forward as I hold the sword. So the kote can be cut in this position. Sometimes the kote is cut in this position. So that is a kote cut. The other cut is a hiza. Hiza is the knee. Sometimes as I perform a hasso no kamae or a jodan no kamae or a waki kamae, obviously the closest target to the opponent is the knee area, and he cuts low to that area. Those are the primary targets in Bato Jutsu or Bato Do. Make sure that as you're performing your waza, as you're performing your kumitachi techniques, your two-man drills, that you are specifically going for those targets to be more effective with your cuts. Masayuki Shimabukuro Hanshi, 8th Dan and chairman of the Jiki Shinkai International, will now demonstrate Haire, Tore, and Taito, that is, bowing to the environment, showing respect for the sword, and then placing the sword in the obi as it's to be worn. Shimabukuro Sensei transfers the sword to his right hand and performs a 60-degree bow. Notice the index finger is placed on the back of the blade, facing the direction of the kisaki, or the tip. From a side view, he transfers the sageo, moves it to the side. Notice there is a 45-degree angle on the blade itself, and it never really moves from that position. He transfers it back to the left hand, and now performs tore, or respect for the sword. The sword is brought forward. The handle, or suka, is pointing to sensei's left, with the blade facing himself. To properly wear the sword, the kojiri is inserted on the outermost layer of the obi, and the sageo can be tied in two manners. One can be left hanging directly to the side, or if the sageo is long enough, you can tie it under the himo of the hakama. Proper stance and proper posture are imperative to proper sword technique. In this DVD, we'll explain and explore the first 7 kamae. The first kamae is known as Geiran no kamae. It is a low-level kamae. The kisaki is held just outside of the right knee. Chudan no kamae is a middle-level kamae. The left hand is approximately 1 to 2/5 from the center of the body, and the tip, or kisaki, is neck level. The next kamae is Jodan no kamae. In Jodan no kamae, the right hand is directly above the forehead, and the kisaki is back at a 45-degree angle. The energy of the body is moving upward into the tip from the feet through the hips. A watching kamae is known as hasso kamae. It's to the side. We move from Hasso to Jodan Kasumi no Kamae, a very aggressive stance, to Chudan Kasumi, and Geidan Kasumi. Bato means to draw the sword. And in Bato Jutsu, or Iai Jutsu, we draw the sword and cut in a single action. This first cut is drawn from the saya in a solid, fluid motion. And getting to that point is very important. It's important that the hands are moved properly, that the timing is proper. I'll work with Shimabukuro Sensei here as a target so you can see the proper way we draw the sword and align it with an opponent. As Sensei approaches the sword, his left hand opens the sword from the koiguchi. This is called koiguchi no kirikata. The sword is opened with the left hand. The right hand approaches the handle. Notice that the wrist is lower on the right side. Only his fingertips are drawing the sword. He draws the sword using the end of the handle as his pressure point and draws directly up the center line of my body. Notice that the sword is not really turning that much. It's staying on a horizontal or a vertical plane, and he's threatening the center line of my body. Then the right hand grips, snapping the sword across and creating the cut as the left hip retracts. From a side view, we can see that there's total extension of the right arm in both the yoku ichimonji, or flat cut, or the angular cut we call keisa. This extension is with the right arm, and the critical application of teno uchi, which creates the angle of the cut, is done once the sword is fully extended. Notice that it is the hip that does the technique, not the arm. The hip pulls back and the shoulder blades slam together, creating an opening in the chest, which creates the cut. So now we're going to learn kiri-yoroshi. Kiri-yoroshi is your two-handed cut, a finishing cut. Kiri means to cut, obviously. Yoroshi means to drop. Kiri-yoroshi, we start all of our kiri-yoroshi for Bato Jutsu, or Bato Ho, from an overhead position. Not really a kamae as such, but it's going to be a fluid transition from nukitsuke to a kiri-yoroshi. So we can start the cut anywhere from a 45-degree angle down to about parallel to the floor. The kisaki shouldn't drop too much past the back of the neck. Notice the suba is in line with the back of my head. Okay? As you grip the sword, we want to make sure that our hands are coming from this direction under the sword and not from the sides of the sword. If we come from the sides of the sword, you'll notice my thumbs are actually on top, and that's an improper grip as we spoke of before. We want the hands behind the sword so that as I raise the sword, now my grip is under the sword itself. From this position, when I cut, if I'm going to cut straight, I extend the sword not downward in this direction, but I always want to extend the sword toward the kisaki, upward, to create my cut. Pushing through the kisaki, extension, and then downward and back to me. The cut is created in an elliptical pattern, not really in a circle. So we want to create a big ellipse by going up, outward. Once the arm is fully extended from the shoulder, the sword begins to move back toward the body. In correct cutting, I would be pulling the sword downward rather than pushing it upward. And the sword has a tendency to bounce at the bottom of the cut. So we want to make sure that we're pushing through the kisaki, outward, wrists are locking, sword is traveling back toward my body. It's also important that we're sure to never cut toward our front foot. if we're going to do any type of a kesa cut, which we'll learn shortly, we're always going to be doing a cut toward our back foot. So we're going to be switching feet on each cut. Switching feet. If I'm cutting right to left, I always cut toward if I'm cutting right to left, I cut toward my back left foot. Vice versa, if I'm cutting left to right, I cut toward my back right foot. As I change position in cutting, I do not want the kisaki to travel on this plane. It's readily seen. It transmits to my opponent what I'm going to do. The way I create the cut is by turning my wrist in this position, on this plane, so that as I approach from the front, that cut, a straight cut, a cut from right to left, or a cut from left to right, all starts the same way, moving through the kisaki, upward, and then creating the angle. The most fundamental two-handed cut is kiriroshi. Shimabukuro sensei will now demonstrate the most fundamental kiriroshi, a straight downward cut through the center line of the body. Notice the finishing position. The kisaki and the blade are parallel to the floor. The second kiriroshi we'll explore is a migi kesa. From the overhead position, Shimabukuro sensei will step forward with his right foot and then adjust the cut with his hands on that plane. Kesa refers to the angle of the monk's robe, cutting from the neck to the hip. Notice the kisaki stops on line with the left hip. From a side angle, you can see that the sword is at a 45-degree angle, drops no more than the back of the neck. Notice Shimabukuro sensei is cutting toward his back left foot when he's cutting right to left, and never toward his front foot. When cutting in kiriroshi, the sword should never drop below the back of the neck. This posture is much too low. Instead, from jodan position, the sword should only drop to the back of the head and the cut from there. The second kiriroshi is a left to right cut. This is called hidari kesa, cutting from the left. Sensei creates the angle of the blade above his head, pushing through the kisaki and then into the cut. Once again, notice the kisaki stops in line with the right hip. From the jodan position, Shimabukuro sensei extends through the kisaki, turning the sword and cutting toward the back right foot. The hidari kesa, the sword ends up parallel to the floor. Chiburi is the act of cleaning the blade after having performed nukitsuke and kiriroshi. Following the cutting, any residue left on the blade should always be cleaned off in order to prevent the blade from rusting or deteriorating. The first chiburi, as being demonstrated, is what's known as omori-ru chiburi or o-chiburi, a big chiburi. It's a large flicking action similar to shaking water off an umbrella. Pressing through the kisaki to the forward right corner. Chiburi in and of itself can never take all of the residue off the blade. However, it's a good reminder within the kata to always clean the blade after having performed your kiriroshi. The second chiburi is known as Eishinru chiburi. Eishinru chiburi is sometimes also known as yoko chiburi or side chiburi. The action is created by pulling your left hand pressure against the little finger and then releasing. This creates a quick snap of the right wrist. Notice the tip or kisaki stays on the same plane as the finished cut. After each successive kiriroshi, in the shoden waza, in Bato Ho, we wait approximately 2.5 to 3 seconds before performing the Yoko Chibori, the Eishin or Chibori. In the Okuden, we create a faster snap. Noto is the correct returning of the sword to the saya or scabbard. The most important part of Noto is proper left hand placement. The hole is actually covered by the last 3 fingers of the hand. The index finger is actually over the end of the saya, creating a second mouth, or koi kuchi. Koi meaning fish, kuchi meaning mouth. The sword is then brought around, touches the elbow, and is in line with the bone in the arm and the line formed by the hand. Pull forward. Notice that the edge of the sword is facing straight up. The sword is slowly pushed downward and inserted back into the saya until the subo or handguard touches the left hand. The thumb raises to the top and secures the habaki or collar. The hand moves forward to the end and secures the sword. Your bata waza are divided into shoden and okuden waza. In shoden waza, we perform the shoden noto. The mine is placed on the left hand close to the suba and drawn forward very quickly and stop. Then slowly is inserted back into the saya. The okuden noto is performed by bringing the monouchi close to the hand, drawing forward quickly and then inserting 1/3 of the blade very quickly, and then slowly returning the rest of the sword into the saya. And now noto at proper speed. Okuden noto is done much faster than shoden noto. In Junto Sunichi, you start by stepping forward with the right foot and the left hand. Then with the left foot and the right hand, pushing the sword up the center line of the body. Step forward and perform a horizontal nukitsuke. Continue forward with the left foot and a vertical kiriroshi. Press forward with the sword and perform ochibori, and bring the feet together as the sword stops. Step back with the left foot and perform shoden noto. Release the right hand and step back with the left foot, then the right foot, until you return to the original position in 5 steps. In Junto Sunoichi, while you are walking forward, the front opponent attempts to cut you. In advance of his action, you directly cut his chest and cut down toward the head of the retreating opponent from over your head while stepping forward with your left foot. Shoden noto with good zanshin. Your eyesight should be focused on your fallen opponent. In Junto Sono Ni, we start as in Junto Sono Ichi. Right foot, left hand, left foot, right hand, drawing up the center line of the body. Opening the hip with the right foot forward, performing Nukitsuke. We slide the right foot forward and cut down the center line. Perform Yoko Chiburi and Shoden Noto. Good awareness must be maintained throughout the entire waza. Release the right hand and step back left, right, left, right, and left. In Junto Sono Ni, while you are walking, the front opponent attempts to cut you. In advance of his action, you cut directly to his chest and cut down the center toward his head of the retreating opponent from over your head while stepping with your right leg forward. We start Suigekito by stepping forward with the right foot, left hand, then left foot, right hand, drawing up the center of the body, cutting diagonally across the opponent's chest. Raise the sword and cut to the head. Stop. Raise the sword and cut once through the entire body. Step back with the right foot into Jodan no Kamae. Pause, then step back with the left foot into Chudan no Kamae. Good awareness, and perform Chiburi. Shoden Noto. The Metsuge is on the fallen opponent. Be aware of where he is, and your eyes will follow throughout the entire process. Right hand drops, and step back left, right, and end with the left foot. In the waza Suigekito, while you are walking, the front opponent attempts to cut you. In advance of his action, you cut the right chest of your opponent diagonally and cut down toward the head of the retreating opponent. Then give him the fatal cut from over your head with a further step of your right leg. Retreat and lower the sword to Chudan no Kamae and perform Yoko Chiburi. Shoden Noto. With good awareness, step forward, release the right hand, and step back 5 steps. Suigekito.